Welcome to part 2. Welcome to part 2C of the mental meanderings of an aging Christian. In part 2B, we examined the question, where do we come from the perspective of the origins of the universe and the evolution of the universe from its Big Bang beginnings to the existence of humanity. In part 2C, we will move to an examination of the quantum physics findings of particularly of the last century, and begin to explore their relationship to not only where do we come from, but additions to the ideas of who we are, and setting the stage for where we might be going. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 examines the theme of where we are now. Part 2 examines the theme of where do we come from. And Part 3 addresses a combination of my beliefs and speculations concerning where we may be going. In looking at where we are now, Part 1 addresses life in an age of rapidly accelerating change. It is to be noted that these reflections on where we are now is far from exhaustive. It is simply a quick opening to several aspects of the world, the universe in which we live. Next slide. Since this project is a project in my mental meandering, it seems appropriate to spend some time on personal experiences in the evolution of my own thinking and some processes that led to my current personal cosmology. Or should we say my current personal universe views. The metaphor of the cracking of one's cosmic egg has had significant meaning for me ever since I first encountered it. In many respects, the journey through life is a constant experience of emerging from one's cosmic egg. Just as the small chick first experiences the cracking of its surrounding eggshell and its emergence into an immensely larger world, so many of us have similar types of experiences, sometimes repeated several times through the life cycle. It is also true that some of us never really break out of our view of the universe shell and remain fixed in the convictions of the smaller in-shell world of our world or universe view. Although undoubtedly many other things contributed to it, in the summer of 1982, while on vacation at our family lake lot, I read the 1980 edition of Marilyn Ferguson's book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. It was the first real introduction into popularizations of the 20th century findings of quantum physics. Her work was the beginning. In the following year, I happened upon The Turning Point of Fritz Capra. In it, he identified 4 themes that have evolved and remained world-changing constants over the last 40 years, namely, the disintegration of patriarchy, the impending decline of the fossil fuel age, the continuing shift in paradigms in cultural and one might even say religious values, and the deepening insights into the new physics or quantum nature of reality. As we turn to consideration of these emerging quantum insights into the nature of reality, it is well to be reminded of the previously cited words of Neil deGrasse Tyson. We have a genetic kinship with all life on Earth, an atomic kinship to all matter in the cosmos. So when I look at the universe, I feel large, because I remind myself that not only are we living in this universe, the universe is living in us. Next slide. This statement from Teilhard de Chardin, that the artificial separation between humans and cosmos is at the root of our contemporary moral confusion, is more than just a casual statement. It can be interpreted as a clear commitment to the 21st century, now much more formally elaborated proposition that the full explanation of who we are is found in the evolutionary processes of the cosmos. It clearly challenges the origin stories from every part of every human clan, tribe, grouping, ethnicity, and even many national groupings. To the extent that these stories formed the foundation for the development of moral imperatives, codes of conduct, and description of the fundamental nature of what it is to be human. To that extent, do the moral codes and the imperatives need to be re-examined and reconstructed based on a humanity that is the product of evolutionary realities. As the product of evolutionary moralities, our moralities have evolved with us, and, as would seem logical and quite possibly likely, will continue to evolve with us. This indeed might be, and I would certainly hold, is one of the most challenging global issues of our day. For many, these moral and consequently human value confrontations contribute significantly to our current human divisions and our relationship struggles. End of slide. Prior to further entering into discussion of quantum knowledge that has emerged over the past century or so, it might be useful to put the state of our knowledge into perspective. This slide depicts current projections as to the composition of the universe. Concepts relative to dark matter and dark energy are still matters of major discussion and debate, and in fact our speculated knowledge may be considered quite minimal. That leaves a projected 5% of what is termed normal matter. Note the breakdowns of normal matter into heavy elements, neutrinos, stars, and hydrogen. So as we proceed through the slides that follow, it is important to humbly remember the very limited extent of our knowledge developments to this point, and yet to stand in amazement at where our inquiry and knowledge skills have taken us. End of slide. After what was stated in the previous slide, the title of this slide, The Stuff of the Universe, is perhaps somewhat misleading. Still, the slide contains acknowledgement of several extremely important concepts. Each of these concepts is itself a lead into a major area of study. The applications of these concepts are now mainstream in the study of human relationships and well-being, from macro to micro and from micro to macro elements of ourselves, the universe, and our place in it. A most remarkable part of such study is that today, in our day, the information of each study area is contained on the internet and is thus available to us without needing to journey beyond the screens of our computers. On to the concepts. Albert Einstein's depiction of quantum reality as the formula of E, representing kinetic energy, is equal to m mass c speed of light squared, and is defined in the Encyclopedia Britannica as the following: the fact that mass and energy are the same physical entity and can be changed into each other. In the equation, the increased relativistic mass m of a body times the speed of light squared, c2, is equal to the kinetic energy of that body. From this basic definition, scientific inquiry has moved to a wave-particle discussion that continues to preoccupy scientists as a portal to current discussions of what exactly is the underlying composition of the material universe. Current agreement is that to use strictly lay terms, it is a reality much softer than the hard matter world with which we are familiar. And if this is so fundamental, then a fundamental unity of matter and energy and the centuries-long dualities of reality can no longer be held, as in separate constructs of energy, spirit, matter, consciousness, mind, body, etc. The graphic itself represents both the enigma and the scientifically demonstrable phenomenon that reality manifests of wave-like reality and/or particle-like reality are fundamentally tied to the observer and the observing instruments. This has been revolutionary in respect to the scientific principle of separation of the unbiased observer from the object observed. Such thinking is indeed scientifically revolutionary. While further explanation is beyond this context, such further exploration is certainly encouraged. The small print at the bottom of the slide states, "This illustration shows the dual nature of light, which acts like both particles and waves. In a new experiment reported in November 2012, researchers observed light photons acting like both particles and waves simultaneously." In my opinion, this simultaneity underlies and offers significant explanation of the psychological, spiritual, social, and physiological interactions that are central to human health and ultimate explanations of the nature of human illnesses. Next slide, please. This slide contains some repetition of the previous slide. Nevertheless, this repetition is viewed as important, simply to stress the importance of the issues. The comments of Niels Bohr are perhaps helpful if some of this seems complex and difficult. Bohr states, "If you think you understand quantum physics, give it up." He simply emphasizes that we are at the very beginning frontiers of these studies. Additionally, Elia Delio provides several descriptive quotes from her 1917 lecture. Matter is really strange stuff. What we call matter lives in a pluralistic existence. Plurality is intrinsic to materiality. The stuff of matter is both wave and particle. The observer/instrument is to this point essential to measurement of waves/particles. Contrary to the exclusion of mind from measurement of quantum reality, the observer is essential to particle wave measurement. The path appears to come into existence only when we observe it. Next slide, please. Once again, some slightly repetitive thoughts. The cartoon, one angel saying to the other, I said, act like a wave, not a particle, when you do that. The wave-particle duality causes more confusion. The top double-slit experiment note simply identifies the key experiment whereby this wave-particle phenomenon came to be understood. The line again that there is no artificial obstacle, no line between subject and object. And finally, that the path comes into existence only when we observe it. What this means to many is that we live in a participatory universe, that by the very fact that we study the universe, we in fact are participants in the study process, active participants, and that in fact the truth that we come to may more wholly exist in us than it does in the external reality, even though apparently strongly based on the external reality. End slide, please. This and the slides that follow provide some further examples of the unfolding of quantum reality and consequences related to scientific findings. The thoughts they represent merely scratch the surface of our deepening understandings of micro and macro phenomena. This slide, entitled Unfolding Space, notes 4 characteristics of unfolding space. From Einstein, there is no absolute space or time. Time does not flow at a fixed rate. Space-time is not flat but curved or warped by distributions of mass and energy in it. Gravity acts to structure space. These are remarkable notions when pushed further. In my language, both space and time have an elasticity that we do not give to them in our days of ordinary existence. Next slide, please. A further expansion of the quantum concepts is found in these statements. Nature is composed of deeply entangled fields of energy. The very nature of the universe is undivided wholeness. Parallel to the development of the quantum physics theories and principles, the concept of wholes had a rebirth in the holographic notions derived from the study of quantum phenomena. The definition of a whole as an undivided unity remained intact. In my understanding, though, the concepts of systems theory became the language of wholes. Systems theory throughout the 20th century had a significant evolution in biology and in the social sciences, but its concepts also apply well in the quantum physics world. And so it becomes very important to list even a few of the fundamental principles of systems theory that now underlie not only our understandings of the universe and how it operates, but in fact of humans and human societies, groups, individuals, families, etc., as descriptions of their functioning, but also as understandings into the nature of their relationships and their relational processes. And so some of these principles include a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. From this, the concept of synergy has wide applications. Systems are undivided wholes existing through intake of external energy and outputs of waste. Change in any part of a system affects change in the whole. Systems are viewed as open or closed, depending on their permeability to inputs. System theories has pervasive applications, as stated earlier, through the human knowledge universe, from physical sciences through to the social sciences. Next slide. This slide, in a rather poetic way, describes the findings concerning the interaction of subatomic particles across the universe. It states, pick a flower on Earth and you move the farthest star. One might reflect on this in terms of the previous slide. Affect change in one part of a whole and one affects the whole. Another way of saying the previous statement, each little thing in the universe is somehow connected to each and every other little thing in the universe. End of slide. This slide provides a summary of what has preceded, with an emphasis on the fact that we live in a continuously evolving universe. We have emerged in the last 300 to 400 years from a worldviews that were static, that were fixed, that were mechanistic. Views that saw our world and our universe as basically permanent and unchanging. The basic paradigm of today and the universe view is of a dynamic, rapidly expanding, constantly changing, and constantly in process world and universe. The concluding line, lawful nature, refers to the fact that in our sciences we study the regularity of nature, the laws of nature that make possible our health, our wellness, the constancy of what appears to be constant change from day to day in our lives, gravity, what makes us healthy, what makes us ill, what treats what is ill. And yet, deep within this, there is a spontaneity of life. That life, to state the obvious, is alive, is changing, is dynamic, is in process. And we know this and experience it in our own developmental processes, in the world around us as it rapidly experiences change, and in the universe we live in. These paradoxical perspectives of constant lawfulness and yet a spontaneity of life are fundamental expressions of what we must now be accustomed to and what shapes where we are going. In the thinking of Teilhard de Chardin, evolution is the rise of consciousness. I interpret this saying or this quotation from Desjardins very broadly. And for me, it puts succinctly the observations from quantum physics about the ability of subatomic particles to interact in synchronization with each other across the universe. To me, in a simple way, this is expressive of a very primitive type of consciousness that exists in the very depths of atomic matter. If this assumption is so, then as we move through the sophistication of the material universe and the complexity of the atomic and molecular organizations, then a parallel movement of consciousness exists until we get to the current state of humanity, which is, in our view, a high degree of consciousness in the unity of a changing material reality we call our bodies. And yet this fundamental unity is totally integrated from the very beginnings of the Big Bang throughout evolution to our current state. In this sense, then, consciousness, awareness, the soul is in fact a product of that evolutionary process. Well, this is a very dramatic statement from the stories of our origins. It seems progressively logical to me. End of slide. The statements made in the preceding slide are now further elaborated. In the words of James Jean, The Mysterious Universe in 1950, mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. The quantum phenomena make it possible to propose that the background of the universe is mind-like. For one observing this video, one might wish to return to the declarations around the existence of the being we call God in one context. In another context, though, it speaks not only to that background of the universe being mind-like, but the mindfulness that is now in the universe, and in fact, perhaps in our consciousness, is a unification with that background to the universe mind, an expression of it, well, not being it, but something that was given birth to by that mind-like consciousness that is now expressed in the mind likeness, that is no longer an accidental intruder, but an integral part of matter. End of slide. This slide carries the thought a little further. If consciousness is part of the cosmos, then mind may be an emergent process, which is just what I alluded to in the previous slide. On the other hand, these are my speculations. You may wish to have your own and to frame them or express them in your own way. The concluding line on the slide, mind is the realm where synthesizing activity occurs. If one extends these two thoughts to what may be logical conclusions, then we should seriously ask the question, what is the place of mind in our world and our universe? And what part does that mind have as it now becomes conscious of itself in the onward evolution of our realities? This slide simply presents a reflective comment. Discussion of the place of mystics and mysticism in the evolution of consciousness is important. It has been important throughout our history in the place of mystical thought in every culture, in every generation. Additionally, it is of a central importance to view the major modern scientific disciplines that are now addressing an evolving body of knowledge concerning consciousness and its place in the affairs of humanity. This opens important areas for acknowledgement and elaboration, namely that the importance of these consciousness, spirituality, roles/disciplines is now central to our very continued existence. As a continuation of this reflective comment, one has the following statements. In a universe world of evolving consciousness, our minds create the world, not the other way around. This is a very troubling and yet profound statement, that our minds create the world. It flies in the face of objective scientific reality and our fundamental conviction that external to our minds exists a material world. That is on one side. On the other side, the only way that we really understand this world, that we conceptualize its space and extent, all of these expressions of the world exist within us, not external to us. And so the statement, our minds create the world, not the other way around, gives rise to a question. Do we now, in human awareness and intent, join universal consciousness in all its levels of this evolving universe world? And it would seem that we do, that in fact the interconnectedness of our consciousness as expressed in its unity and the dynamic flow of the subatomic world means that our consciousnesses are in fact linked in more profound ways perhaps than what we'll call our bodily expressions. Another question: is this a fundamental human vocational responsibility in its most practical terms? In other words, given the place of our minds and our consciousness in the universe, is this the grounding of an ever-emerging science of ethics, morality as a branch of philosophy, that what is right, what is good, and what is to be loved because it's good have strong dictates on the ways in which, through our reasoning, we should come to behave and to understand our place and vocations in the universe. Next slide, please. This slide is placed here simply to re-emphasize the statements from the previous slide. In the world of evolving consciousness, our minds create the world, not the other way around. Yet, at the same time, it was from the very first satellites that circled our globe that an image along the lines of this image emerged, not just in our consciousness, but in the realities of the universe in which our consciousness exists. Next slide. In checking several dictionary definitions of the word resurrection, it has, in these definitions, a strong reference to the Christianity perspective on resurrection and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. What is presented in this slide is a view of resurrection that may become useful later on, but seems appropriate at this point. Resurrection seen as a breakthrough to a new level of individuated consciousness, a new basis from which to understand human destiny, the emergence of a new self, new sense of selfhood, a new sense of what it means to belong to the cosmos. Again, these are simply thoughts that I present. You might wish to have your own conclusions, extend them in your own thinking. End of slide. Some thoughts from Henri Bergson pertaining to creative evolution, I believe sourced in the work of Elia Delio. Bergson claims that our natural capacity for combining biology and technology has not gone far enough, that it remains in the grip of the natural tendencies of closed societies. Nature is conservative. What beings do naturally is cling to their form and resist change. The evolutionary tendency to change is the creative power of life radically becoming. Natural cyborgs, the combining of biology and technology, must become supernatural ones if we want to loosen the bonds of natura naturata towards natura naturans. In my limited translation, nature as nature, or nature naturing. End of slide. This slide provides a very brief introduction to the concept of transhumanism. Transhumanism is an international intellectual movement that aims to transform the human condition by developing and making available sophisticated technologies that enhance the human intellect and physiology. In a very succinct and definite way, the statement that follows is technology will fulfill the immortality that religion promises. And so the concept of the movement and integration of physiology and machines in the expression of computers, but also in the development of physiology to extend human life, contains within it, perhaps, a promise of immortality. It is certainly an area of very deep concern and inquiry in today's world. End of slide. The singularity concept parallels the transhumanism and cyborg thoughts. And so it is briefly introduced here also. Singularity is viewed as the point resulting from ever accelerating technological process when a sufficient threshold of self-evolving artificial intelligence is reached to result in a superintelligence that is beyond human conception or ability. Again, there are various predictions concerning when we might reach this singularity. Raymond Kurzweil, a futurist, predicts singularity by the year 2045, about 27 years from now. Hans Moravec, founder of a robotics company, one of whose goals is to develop an autonomous robot capable of navigating without human intervention, states intelligent machines will provide humanity with personal immortality by mind transplant. These are very far out kinds of conceptions for most of us. I simply present them. Rothblatt, in the book Mind Clones, Mind Files, Mindware, virtually human, the promise and the peril of digital immortality. Thus is an introduction, a very quick one, to the concept of singularity and the relationship of humans and the technological world. Next slide. As I turn to the concluding thoughts and summary of Part 2C, my memory goes back to my days teaching at the University of Calgary. Across the hall was an author in residence whose name was W.O. Mitchell. He was a very famous Canadian writer who wrote about the early days of life in rural Saskatchewan particularly, but on the rural prairies in Western Canada, through the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Through the 40s and particularly in the 50s, he authored a long series of radio programs entitled Jake and the Kid. Every one of us who grew in a small village or on a farm in Saskatchewan knew the relationship of being a young boy to the hired man. And that is what these CBC radio programs were about. Anyway, that was W.O. Mitchell. In his living across the hall from me, He would often say, as I walked by his open door, stop, hey Jack, for a minute, would you listen? I just finished this paragraph in a book he's working on, and I'd like you to listen to it. And so I would, and I'd tell him it was good, and that would be where the conversation ended. Except one day he said, well, I'm just about finished. And then he said, one is never finished writing a book. One simply decides to stop. And as I come to the conclusion of part 2C, that thought is very much forward in my mind. Where we have gone since the beginning of this series is an introduction that looked at my motivation for who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going, to a look at life in the modern world, particularly from the perspective of its exponential and rapidly evolving change. Secondly, in part 1 that followed, we looked at the place of evolution. And in part 2, we looked at evolution and the fact that the history of humans is the history of evolution in the universe. And then, as we moved on to the various parts of part 2, to B and C, we further explicated the sciences involved in what I have been presenting, and finally, thoughts with regard to the evolution of consciousness and the integration of the technologies so rapidly, so deeply involved in our change today and the evolution of consciousness. I wish now to move in part 3 to the where are we going perspective. And in so doing, I will become much more declarative about my own belief system in uniting it to the 2,000-year history of Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition that goes back many thousand years beyond, perhaps 10,000 or more. And in that doing so, I wish to try to unite what has taken place in the first parts of these presentations with my thoughts, my mental meanderings about our place in the universe and where we might be going. End of slide. Thank you.